in New Mexico. It was night, and the road was empty. The sky was black velvet, and the stars were as clear as they are where there is no civilization. Even the occasional meteor flew over the horizon like a lone snowflake. It was just me, my trusty F-150, and the occasional armadillo. All that was missing was a smelly old brown dog named Buster, and it would have been a sad country-style song. I remembered a few days ago, it's funny how a simple decision can change your life. To cross the street or not to cross the street. To turn left or right. To scratch an itch or not. We make hundreds of these choices every day, and sometimes they can kill you. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. She was just acting different. There was too much detail in her work, as if she were painting a picture. She was too attentive to the schedule, like she was watching me, and meticulously fulfilling her feminine duties. It was as if she thought that loving me more often would make me less suspicious. It's funny how a simple decision can change your life. To cross the street or not to cross the street. To turn left or right. To scratch an itch or not. We make hundreds of these choices every day, and sometimes they can kill you. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. She was just acting different. There was too much detail in her work, as if she were painting a picture. She was too attentive to the schedule, like she was watching me and meticulously fulfilling her feminine duties. It was as if she thought that loving me more often would make me less suspicious. In this age, it's too easy to get to the truth. In fact, people would cheat less if they knew how far technology extends. So when that little devilish suspicion tickled my fancy, I simply downloaded the highly rated bluejacking tool. The only problem is that you might find out things you just don't want to find out. Brenda was a great wife, smart, witty, gorgeous, and just a monster in the bedroom. How we met and married is irrelevant. Suffice it to say that for 14 years, we lived a happy middle-class life in the northeast suburbs of Albuquerque. We were low income by choice, so we could afford the best of everything: a nice house, frequent traveling, and expensive restaurants. Brenda was a treat on a stick. Petite, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and very shapely, with firm breasts and amazingly long legs. But her most important asset is her firm, calloused ass. My wife was doing PR consulting for an international company that made its fortune building paradises. Given New Mexico's sunny climate, building paradises had long been a growth industry. The only problem was that the people living in the paradise might not want to pave it. So Brenda held many meetings and networked with major financiers and politicians. Brenda's career was my version of Dante's 90th level of hell. I'm a nerd, you see, and nerds don't get out much. I do botany work at Sandia National Laboratories, which is why we lived in Albuquerque. The job is high-paying and not stressful because I'm very good at what I do. I work in the field of counterintelligence technology. It's a profession that's all about lying and deception, kind of like politics. The job involves a lot of old-fashioned machismo, but it's more like Dr. Evil's machismo than Conan's machismo. Of course, a devilishly clever man will always defeat a muscular and stupid one. You may be wondering how Brenda and I ended up as a beauty and a nerd. Like I said, the details of the affair don't matter. We hit it off because we are both smart, fun, and adventurous. She's dated a lot of jocks and pretty boys. I'm not bad-looking and fairly well off, so I've had my share of hot women. The problem was that everyone we dated before we met bored us to tears. After marriage, you will spend a significant amount of time with only one person. That's why it's better for you to marry someone who makes you happy. Brenda and I had very different personalities, but we fit together like we were made for each other. But that doesn't mean we walked around joined at the hip. We had our own interests and special abilities, but our complementary qualities cemented our bond. Brenda's emotions made her a delightful partner. My wife was never bored or dull with me, but sometimes her feelings got the best of her, and she relied on me to calm her down. And me, I'm too brainy. Brenda pulled me out of my own thoughts. We're both not very big. Brenda is 5'2", and I might be called 5'9", but we are both as healthy as can be. We both love the outdoors, and Albuquerque is the perfect place for that. We hiked, biked, and kayaked daily. People thought we were the perfect couple. I think it was my lack of height that gave Hondo the idea that Brenda would be easy prey. Richard Tadwell was a neighbor. He was a major in one of the training wings at Kirtland, and the role of great American hero was right up his alley. He had even adopted a call sign. No one knew where he got it, for he wasn't a pilot, but he preferred to be called Hondo. Most of us just called him Tud, mostly because he hated being called that. Tud was muscular, half a foot taller than me, and perhaps 70 pounds heavier. Most of that weight was subcutaneous fat, whereas I didn't have an ounce of fat at 75. But the contrast in size made it seem like I was 3/4 taller than he was, and he didn't hide it. Every guy has been bullied. Most either accept it or fight it. But there are some fun alternatives. I've always had a way with words. So in situations where I was being bullied, I would respond with a clever remark that got to everyone else, but flew right over the target's head. The trick was to stab the guy in such a way that he wouldn't realize it had happened until his head turned and fell off. So when Hondo patronizingly called me Little Davy, I shrugged, laughed self-consciously, and guffawed. Not where it counts, little Dicky. The look of confusion on Tud's face at the bursts of laughter was priceless. A snake snuck into my garden because people in our neighborhood like to party. There are many things that interest me, but none of them include gossip, innuendo, or frank judgments about the worldly adventures of distant acquaintances. But Brenda is steeped in that. I never could figure out if her group really enjoyed each other's company, or if the parties were just a playing field for them to stake out their territory. What I do know for sure is that there was too much drinking and up-close and personal contact among the players. I went to these awful events because that's what good husbands do. However, since I cared least about golf or the Albuquerque Isotopes win-loss record, I always found myself in the group of supportive spouses, while the insiders reveled in the pleasures of the herd, typically a cheerful arrival, followed by a machine gun crackle of small talk as they recounted the events of the 6 long days they had spent apart. Then, after the wheels of socializing had been greased by copious amounts of alcohol, the participants would move on to the real point of the evening: cozy drunken conversations. These conversations usually involved overly familiar touches, some questionable touches, and melodramatic outpourings of emotion about topics that might have seemed trivial if both conversationalists were of sound mind. Brenda lived for this. She told me she was a people person. She certainly was. But she also enjoyed playing mother confessor to her daredevil girlfriends. Vampires must suck blood, and Brenda seemed to have the same need to gossip. Nevertheless, I learned some very shocking things about the supposedly happily married residents of the neighborhood. It was at one such party that I caught my wife having an intimate conversation with Hondo Tudwell. It was amazing. Tud was hunched over and looking distraught, and Brenda was lovingly squeezing his hand in hers. I would have bought the pretense if it weren't for the fact that Hondo kept his eyes on Brenda's ravishing cleavage as he poured out his heart. I hated this guy for a number of reasons, besides the fake machista act. The scene playing out in front of me only added another count to the indictment. Turd was a ruthless womanizer. He told anyone who was foolish enough to ask that it was his privilege as the alpha male in the herd. We all thought it was because he was an immoral asshole. We used to ignore him unless he was bothering your wife. Then the impulse was to snatch her from his clutches, and the sooner the better. So I said nonchalantly, though I was seething inside, "Come on, Brenda, it's late." She looked up, anger flashing across her face, and she replied, "Can't you see we're discussing something important, Davy?" Now that was a new, very different reaction. Turd saw that he had been divorced. Therefore he began to grieve nobly. He said, "No, Brenda. You have been a great help to me. You need to go home to your husband." Then he patted her hand sadly, got up and wandered back into the seething mass of people, dragging the broken and defeated behind him. St. Brenda was distraught all the way home. It seems Turd's wife, the woman he had loved since their days at Texas A and M University of the Arts, had started grooming him, and he was depressed. They were the perfect couple. Turd was an obnoxious, narcissistic asshole, and Polly was an empty-headed, narcissistic bimbo who used to be Miss Texas World. She was breathtaking, unless you had a harrowing experience with her. After all, a person's body has as much blood as it needs, right? In Polly's case, it was obvious that her bust was siphoning off the life-giving fluid that should have gone to her brain. However, with a face and body like hers, it didn't matter. But I digress. Turd spied Brenda in a dark corner to ask her for advice. When I stumbled into their cozy sit-down, Brenda was helping Dickhead deal with grief. I didn't believe it for a minute, but Brenda loves heartwarming melodrama, and she was unhappy that I'd broken up her little tete-a-tete. According to St. Brand, Turd has revealed dirt on Polly, and it's killing him. Any sane person would have immediately said that was nonsense. Turd was as elusive as Pepe Le Pew in his relentless pursuit of everything in a dress. So he had plenty of his own excursions off the reservation. But Brenda bought Turd's story. In the ensuing argument, Brenda tried to justify her willingness to listen to this smug goon by telling me that he was actually a very sensitive person, hiding under all that glitter. Of course, that remark opened up another front. I said hotly, "And how do you know anything about what may or may not be lurking beneath Tadwell's teenage appearance? Have you ever spent any time in his treehouse?" Brenda had the nobility to look embarrassed. She said, "Well, he came by a couple times to talk to you, but you were never around him." It hit me right between the eyes. It's not like Turd was even trying to be subtle. I said, "Did it ever occur to you that you might be his target?" Brenda was genuinely puzzled. She said, "Why does he want to talk to me? You're the one with the big government powers." He said he had something to discuss about clearances. Talk about ignorance. I said, "Look, Brenda, you're the most beautiful woman on the block. Every guy on the block thinks so." Brenda gave me a typically feminine look that told me she liked to hear that. But she didn't like hearing it from me because it created fertile ground for jealousy. I continued. "The camel was just trying to find out how far under the tent he could stick his lips. I hope you didn't invite him in." She looked worried. She said, "Several times he asked if he could come in and wait for you, but he didn't stick around." I asked, sounding even more disgruntled. "How many is a few? And why wasn't he there when I arrived?" Brenda looked like something was starting to get through to her. She said, "Well, for the last month, it's been 3 or 4 times a week in the afternoon. He stops by on his way home from Kirtland, but you're always at work. He waits for a while and we talk, but he has to go home or Polly will worry." I laughed out loud and said, "That's the biggest shit I've ever heard. Since when did Tudwell give a shit what his wife thought?" Brenda looked at me indignantly and said, "He treasures his marriage very much. He tells me over and over how lucky we are to have each other. He wishes he had what we have. That's why I was so supportive when he told me about Polly's infidelity." I said angrily, "He wants some of what I have, and he better keep it just a wish. From now on, tell Hondo to call me if he needs to talk. I don't want to catch him alone with you." Brenda said, getting very angry, "You don't get to tell me what to do. This isn't the Dark Ages." The discussion was traveling down a dark and dangerous road, so I said, "For the sake of compromise, if he shows up again, just call me at work. I guarantee I'll be there in less than 10 minutes. I knew that would chase the varmint away. Needless to say, we had no relationship that night, and for weeks afterward. However, we did love each other, and eventually the ice melted. By the end of the month, we had both completely forgotten about it. I thought Santa Fe is 1.5 miles above sea level, so even if it's hot in Albuquerque, it's always nice there. Santa Fe is also home to the most interesting art scene in the United States. Brenda and I were Georgia O'Keeffe fans, and her museum was selling several originals. The paintings went for between $1 million and $5 million, but I had my eye on a signed serograph. It seemed like we could get it for only $3,000. So we went there to try our luck. Sometimes we camp out. But this was an expedition to a fine art museum. So we took a different route and stayed at the Inn of the Five Graces, which is relatively close to the museum. The place resembled a hacienda, adobe walls and heavy Spanish furniture. The bed looked as if Ferdinand and Isabella had carved it in the monstrosity's Ruz workshop. The word ornate didn't fit to describe it. That was fortunate, as Brenda was finally back in a good mood. My spouse has been distant all month. I attributed it to a fight over Turd. She thought I was being mean and insensitive, while I thought she was being an idiot. We actually made love more often than usual, but it wasn't the usual all-in-one extravaganza we were both used to. Obviously, there were still some tender feelings. As we finished our meal at a nearby restaurant, night fell. There is something special about a sunset on a warm evening in Santa Fe. The air is soft, and the light has a unique red-golden hue. The sky was almost purple, with bright incipient stars, and the crescent moon rising in the northeast made me want to howl. And Brenda's enthusiastic gaze told me that howling was going to happen tonight. She was wearing a little black dress, adorned with a necklace that had small pieces of pure turquoise set into it. I bought it for her that same afternoon. Brenda is of Italian descent, and the contrast of the bright blue stones against her smooth, swarthy Mediterranean skin was lovely. My wife has one of those perfectly proportioned faces, with huge brown eyes and a cap of thick, dark brown hair that she wears in a stylish pixie cut, with ripped layers that emphasize her high cheekbones and sharp chin. When Brenda sets her deep, dark gaze on some poor man, there is little he can concede to her. However, Brenda's mouth and sculpted lips are what stop traffic. Movie stars pay fortunes to have full, moving lips like hers. They're always in motion when we kiss, nibbling and pulling. It's the best sensation imaginable because it conveys her full participation. Usually we take a long time to prepare for the pleasantries, rather than just diving headfirst into it. But my wife was on a mission. As soon as we entered the room, she jumped out of her dress and dragged me into the bedroom by my tie. The sight of that thong made me a titan. And then the thought hit me. When did she start wearing thongs? As soon as Brenda got to the bed, she turned around and just ripped my shirt open, buttons flying in all directions, and fell to her knees. She went at it like it was the last ice cream on earth. It got me thinking. In all our marriage, Brenda had never done anything even close to similar. But before I could think about what had just happened, she pulled away and began frantically dragging me toward the bed. Once we got to the bed, my wife turned around, and without further ado, she wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me to her to give me the hottest kiss she had ever given me. There are moments here that YouTube didn't miss, but they're already on our Patreon. Brenda is a petite woman, but she has a beautiful, strong body. All the feelings and scenes with her are like listening to the first notes of Beethoven's Ninth Song. You can hear it a million times, but it still touches you deeply. I had an irresistible urge, so I sat down on the bed and pulled her to me. I sat with her and drove her into a frenzy. She was on fire. Never in our entire extensive history had I remembered her showing herself like that. She pushed me away, hastily climbing onto the bed. She became completely inarticulate for a change, making strange and growling noises. Brenda found herself in a whole new brave world of wild screams. The expression on her face expressed intense passion. Then she began to simply shout, "Oh my God, Davy!" Then Brenda paused, strangely still. It was like she was having a hyper-rational moment. It was strangely spiritualized. Brenda leaned over, opened her incredible eyes, and looked directly at me. I saw her love and also something else. It was like regret. There's also a very hot scene here that YouTube wouldn't have missed and banned this clip. It was such a bizarre experience that I had a hard time coming to my senses. But this final demonstration of carnal intemperance took me to my goal at the speed of light. I was completely exhausted by the time I reached the finish line. Then we lay side by side in the moonlight, holding hands and drenched in sweat. I almost didn't ask her about it. I should have, but the warning signs were still too new, and we'd been married too long for me to face her out of the blue. So I suppose it's natural to hesitate. Am I serious? Who's brave enough to put their happiness on the line with one roll of the dice after a fantastic night? Your life will take a much darker path if you end up with snake eyes. I had a great career, a beautiful wife, and life was good. So let's save the questions for another time. Brenda turned to me and said almost desperately, "I love you, Davy. Don't ever forget that. You are my man. We're going to grow old together. Just you and me." It was a fitting end to a very strange evening. Dear viewers, today we close the first chapter of our mesmerizing story that plunges us into the depths of love, passion, and betrayal. We have witnessed how Dave and Brenda's peaceful and seemingly perfect existence is suddenly overshadowed by dark clouds of doubt and misunderstanding. Their night full of passion, and Brenda's sometimes uncharacteristic behavior, makes us wonder about the secrets that may lurk behind the facade of a happy marriage. Is the curtain of secrecy unfurling? Or is this just a precursor to a more powerful reveal? Paradoxically, sometimes one of life's most incredible nights can be the harbinger of a thunderstorm on whose doorstep the question arises, are things really as good as they seem? The deep words of love and promise whispered by Brenda sound almost like a plea for forgiveness, creating a psychologically intense plot twist that unwittingly makes Dave wonder about his wife's devotion. What awaits our heroes in the next chapter? What secrets is Brenda ready to reveal, and is Dave ready to face the possible truth? Will there be an answer to the troubling question of reticence and stranger touches? A thrilling continuation of the story awaits you on our Patreon, where you can find the full uncensored version of the first chapter. We invite you to stay tuned to see how this tangle of mysteries unravels, as each new answer may create many more questions.